بروکسل، کنفرانس در پارلمان اروپا. ایران، چشمانداز تغییر و سیاست اتحادیه اروپا با حضور 10 نماینده و حمایت از شورای ملی مقاومت و طرح 10 ماده‌ای خانم رجوی برای آینده ایران. 3 خرداد 1402. استقبال هموطنان و 22 تن از نمایندگان پارلمان هنگام ورود.
Come on!
سخنرانی‌های نمایندگان پارلمان اروپا.
خاویر سارسالخوس، رئیس مشترک گروه دوستان ایران آزاد در پارلمان اروپا، معاون کمیسیون ویژه مداخلات خارجی، دبیرکل دفتر نخست وزیر اسپانیا 2004. میلان زور، رئیس مشترک گروه دوستان ایران آزاد در پارلمان اروپا، وزیر آموزش و ورزش اسلوونی 2008، نایب رئیس هیئت رابطه با کشورهای آسیای جنوبی. آنا فوتیگا، وزیر خارجه لهستان 2007، عضو کمیسیون خارجی پارلمان اروپا. پاتریسیا تویا، وزیر امور برابری ایتالیا 2000، وزیر روابط پارلمانی 2001، معاون کمیسیون صنعت، تحقیقات و انرژی. ریچارد چارنسکی، وزیر پیشین امور اروپایی لهستان، عضو کنفرانس رؤسای هیئت‌های پارلمان اروپا، نایب رئیس پارلمان اروپا 2018، نایب رئیس کمیته دادخواست‌ها. استانیسلاو پولچاک، نماینده پارلمان اروپا.
سوزانا چیکاردی، عضو کمیسیون خارجی و کمیسیون حقوق بشر پارلمان اروپا. یان زهرادیل، معاون کمیسیون تجارت بین المللی. ایوان استفانتس، نماینده پارلمان اروپا. خوزه مانوئل فرناندز، عضو کنفرانس رؤسای هیئت‌ها در پارلمان اروپا. هرمن ترچ، نایب رئیس گروه محافظه‌کاران و رفرمیست‌ها. فرانسیس فیتزجرالد، نایب رئیس گروه مردم اروپا، عضو کمیسیون حقوق زنان و برابری، وزیر تجارت ایرلند 2017، وزیر دادگستری و برابری 2014-2017. جیانا گانچا، نماینده پارلمان اروپا.
دکتر آلخو ویدال کوادراس، رئیس کمیته بین‌المللی در جستجوی عدالت، نایب رئیس پیشین پارلمان اروپا 1999 تا 2014.
ایران، چشمانداز تغییر و سیاست اتحادیه اروپا با حضور 10 نماینده و حمایت از شورای ملی مقاومت و طرح 10 ماده‌ای خانم رجوی برای آینده ایران.
خانم مریم رجوی، فراخوان به یک کارزار بین المللی برای توقف اعدام در ایران.
خانم مریم رجوی: من آمدم که خواست قیام کنندگان و به طور خاص زنان ایران را که علیه دیکتاتوری مذهبی به اعتراض برخاسته اند تکرار کنم. مردم ایران برای سرنگونی دیکتاتوری دینی برخاسته اند. هر نوع استبدادی را رد می کنند و تا کسب آزادی و دموکراسی به نبرد ادامه خواهند داد.
یک تحول ناشی از قیام شکست شبه آلترناتیوهای کاذب است، به خصوص بقایای دیکتاتوری‌های شیخ و شاه. برخی تصور می‌کردند با پروپاگاند گسترده می‌توانند این گونه باندها را رهبری قیام جا بزنند، اما شکست خوردند.
مقاومت مردم ایران اتحادیه اروپا را فرا می‌خواند با تجدید نظر در سیاست قبلی خود نسبت به ایران این اقدامات را انجام دهد. قرار دادن سپاه پاسداران در لیست تروریستی، فعال کردن مکانیزم ماشه و بازگرداندن تحریم‌های مسرح در 6 قطعنامه شورای امنیت علیه این رژیم. این رژیم را به عنوان تهدید مبرم صلح و امنیت جهان مشمول ماده 41 فصل 7 منشور ملل متحد کند. به رسمیت شناختن حق مبارزه مردم ایران برای سرنگونی رژیم و نبرد مشروع جوانان ایران با پاسداران اشغالگر.
خاویر سرسلخوس: برخلاف میل رژیم ایران، ما از خانم رجوی به عنوان عالی ترین نماینده مقاومت ایران دعوت کرده ایم تا از آخرین وضعیت ایران و مقاومت و اینکه اروپا چگونه میتواند از خواسته های مردم ایران حمایت کند بشنویم.
خانم رجوی بزرگترین اپوزیسیون سازمان یافته در ایران را رهبری می کند. صداقت و تعهد وی نمونه الهام بخش برای همه ماست. او به عنوان یک زن مسلمان یک چالش بزرگ سیاسی، اجتماعی، فرهنگی و ایدئولوژیک برای رژیم ملایان در ایران است و برای ما افتخاری است که از او در پارلمان استقبال کنیم.
I am particularly glad, pleased and honored to welcome you to this meeting. I am particularly honored to be here sitting by Mrs. Rajavi. Her integrity, her commitment is an inspiring example for us all, providing the continuing leadership that the fight for democracy, that the fight for the free Iran requires. This is the house of the European democracy. This is the largest democratically elected parliament in the world. We are very proud of that, and we want to share that. And we want that this also becomes the house of those who fight for freedom in the world in which we know that freedom is in short supply. So, welcome, Mrs. Rajavi, to the heart of the European Union. The members of the European Parliament have shown during the last years strong commitment with the Iranian people and strong support for the legitimate aspirations of freedom, stability and democracy. Since on the 13th of September 2022, the Iran's morality police killed 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish woman Masha Jina Amini. The European Parliament has adopted 3 resolutions on Iran. Last but not least, the European Parliament's resolution on the 16th of March 2023 condemned the attempt to silence women and girls in Iran by poisoning the schoolgirls. Once again, the European Parliament reiterates its call on the Council to designate the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization and to expand the EU sanctions list. The current wave of protests and uprisings is the biggest internal threat to the regime, who answers with the strongest repression. Iranian people are facing an escalation of executions. Almost every 5 hours, a person is executed in Iran. Despite the regime attempts to launder its policies, it is a fact that the regime itself cannot be reformed, but have to be overcome and start the process to a transition to democracy. Europe just cannot be a spectator. The Iranian regime is a very serious threat to international peace and security. In particular, the direct involvement of the Iranian regime in the Ukraine war has brought this global threat to Europe. The European Union has to firmly act and define a sustainable and well-established strategy towards Iran. In fact, listing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization would be an effective measure that have not yet been implemented despite the emphasis of the European Parliament resolutions. In this path towards democracy, it is essential to recognize the resistance movement and support Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan, calling for a democratic, secular and non-nuclear republic in Iran. The Iranian resistance in Europe is a partner in confronting the threat of the Iranian regime. The National Council of Resistance and its central force, because it has a network of loyal forces inside Iran and because of its organized structure, is an alternative to bring down the mullahs. Contrary to this desire of the Iranian regime, we have invited Mrs. Rajabi as the highest representative of the Iranian resistance to hear about the latest situation of Iran and the resistance and how Europe can support the Iranian people's desire for free in the most effective way. Mrs. Rajabi leads the largest organized opposition in Iran. Mrs. Rajabi is the tireless leader of Iran's opposition who has repeatedly called for commitment for a free Iran here in the European Parliament over the past 19 years. Mr. Rajabi lost thousands of her colleagues and friends in the 50 years of a struggle against two dictatorships, including 6 members of her family. She was one of the leaders of a student movement in the Shah's era. She was one of the candidates in the first parliamentary election after revolution, and despite all rigging, achieved 250,000 votes, but the regime rejected her to enter in the parliament, as we could expect. Her 10-point platform, among others, advocates democratic republic for Iran based on free election, gender equality, separation of religion and state, abolition of death penalty, and a non-nuclear Iran. As a Muslim woman, she represents a formidable political, social, cultural, and ideological challenge to the mullahs regime in Iran. And it's an honor for us to receive her in the Parliament. Thank you, Mrs. Rajab.
Thank you, honorable representatives, dear friends. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to meet with you, representatives of the European nations who have courageously supported the Iranian people's struggle for freedom and democracy. As I speak to you today, the Iranian regime has started a new and unprecedented wave of executions. 116 prisoners were executed from the beginning of May. It means one execution every 5 hours. I have come here today to call for an international campaign to stop executions in Iran. 3 young protesters who had been detained and tortured for months in Eصفهان were executed last Friday. The regime uses executions to create an atmosphere of terror and prevent an uprising. But despite massive repression, people protested these brutal executions in Tehran and various other cities. Unfortunately, we are witnessing a lack of action from the European Union and its member states. Isn't opposing executions one of the well-known principles of the European Union? So why, when it comes to Iran, economic interests and political considerations downplay the importance of human rights situation? I'm here today to echo the desire of the protesters, especially Iranian women who have risen up against religious dictatorship. The Iranian people have risen to overthrow the religious fascism. They reject tyranny in all its forms and will persist in their fight until they achieve freedom and democracy. The uprising that began last September has created several significant developments. The regime's overthrow is inevitable. the clerical regime has reached an impasse, the organized resistance within Iran has made a big leap forward, and the false alternatives have failed. Let me briefly explain each of these developments. One of the main reasons for the uprisings is the widespread anger and discontent among Iranian society. Such explosive capacity is particularly visible in the courageous confrontation of Iranian women against the regime's forces. Iranian women play a leading role in the protests, now more than ever, impressing the world with their bravery. A brave and dedicated young generation is determined to overthrow the regime. At night in Tehran and other cities, people chant death to Khamenei from the roofs of their homes. Every Friday, anti-regime protests take place in Zahedan. Moreover, teachers' protests, strikes by workers, and demonstrations by retired people continue across the country. Another important development is the regime's deadlock. The regime lacks the ability to initiate any reforms, as it would undermine Khamenei's power and result in the regime's total downfall. The regime's actions to preserve its rule only intensify discontent, fueling the uprising. In short, returning to the pre-uprising situation has become impossible. As a result, the regime's overthrow by the people and their organized resistance and uprising is inevitable. This situation has had two important effects within the regime. One, defections from the regime have intensified. Two, the failure of Khamenei's most important political project in recent years, that was the appointment of Raisi, the executioner of the 1988 massacre, as the regime's president. Another significant development is the remarkable gross social networks. The regime, in its internal assessment, considers the MEK as a group that have unity, organized structures, and ability to infiltrate intelligence systems. It also acknowledges that they have the ability and a history of struggle and demonstrated a high intelligence capacity to mislead intelligence services. It also states they are recognized as the only organization with a clear alternative plan. It concludes that they are therefore seen as shrewd and subversive. High-level committee, including, has been formed to counter the People's Mujahideen. 7 out of 13 departments of the Foreign Ministry participate in this committee. Their project is to discredit the Iranian resistance. By spreading false information, the regime aims to undermine the just and legitimate resistance of the Iranian people and undermines democratic foundations and free flow of impartial information in Europe. Another important outcome of the uprising is the failure of false alternatives, particularly those related to the remnants of the Shah and clerical dictatorships. Some thought they could present these groups as leaders of the uprising through extensive propaganda, but they failed. There exists a strong democratic and organized movement in Iran, and 120,000 political dissidents had sacrificed their lives for freedom. The people of Iran will not accept to return to the previous dictatorship that subjected them to several years of oppression, with countless imprisonments and political executions under a single party rule. The ongoing developments during the uprising have demonstrated that the protests alone are not enough to overthrow the regime. A committed and well-organized resistance movement is needed to confront a brutal regime. The alternative to this regime is the very force that maintains the flame of resistance and plays the key role in organizing and spreading the protests. 19 years ago, during a meeting in the European Parliament, I said, the mullahs in Tehran claim that any significant change requires a foreign war, and there is no option other than appeasement. But I said there is a third solution, change by the Iranian people and organized resistance. Now, I want to emphasize that this solution has emerged from the heart of the Iranian people's uprising, and everybody can see the reality. The real alternative has been born from a long-lasting battle with generations sacrificing their lives for it. The National Council of Resistance of Iran, established in Tehran 4 decades ago, represents various beliefs. The Iranian resistance platform is based on a republic, separation of religion and state, full individual and social freedom, gender equality, autonomy for ethnic nationalities, elimination of the death penalty, independent judiciary, dissolving the IRGC, a non-nuclear Iran, and international and regional coexistence and cooperation. At the center of this alternative is the MEK, which believes in democratic Islam and advocates for the separation of religion and the state. Therefore, this resistance represents the antithesis of the religious dictatorship ruling Iran. Dear friends, today it is widely accepted that the clerical regime has significantly weakened and lost its strategic abilities and resources. However, its hostilities have intensified, whether in seeking nuclear weapons or in supporting terrorism and warmongering, even into the heart of Europe now. The contradiction in Western approach to Iran is the outcome of the policy of appeasement. The regime has repeatedly targeted global peace and security and constantly violated international laws without facing any consequences. Even worse, it has received rewards and incentives. Every hour of delay in adopting the right policy towards the religious dictatorship in Iran results in more executions for the people of Iran, more hostages for the world, and more drones for Europe. The Iranian resistance calls on the European Union to reconsider its previous policies towards Iran and include the IRGC in its list of terrorist organizations, trigger snapback mechanism, and restore the sanctions stated in the 6 UN Security Council resolutions against the regime, designate the regime as a serious threat to global peace and security under Article 41 of Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, and recognize the Iranian people's right to struggle to overthrow the regime, as well as the Iranians use legitimate struggle against the occupying IRGC. Finally, I ask you, honorable representatives, to urge your governments to join the international campaign to stop executions in Iran and stand with the Iranian people. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.